Greetings and welcome. Tonight we embark on a journey into the life of a man born to rule an empire and destined to witness its final, quiet collapse. As the world slumbers, we will drift back in time to an era of imperial grandeur, a time when a child inherited a throne that was both a symbol of immense power and a relic of a fading past. We are entering the story of Aisin-Gioro Puyi, the last emperor of China. Our narrative will unfold not as a tale of dramatic battles or political intrigue, but as a gentle exploration of a life lived within the walls of a city of emperors, and then beyond, into a world undergoing a seismic transformation. This is a story of a boy, a man, and a nation caught between ancient traditions and the inexorable march of modernity. Our journey begins in the autumn of 1908. In the heart of Beijing, within the walls of the Forbidden City, a world of imperial splendor and rigid ritual exists, largely untouched by the changes sweeping the globe. The Forbidden City itself is a sprawling complex of red walls, golden roofs, and serene courtyards, where the air is thick with the scent of incense and the echoes of generations of imperial power. It is here that Puyi, a boy of just 2 years, is brought to the throne. His anointing is not a moment of triumph, but one of silent, solemn ritual, dictated by the will of the Empress Dowager Cixi, the formidable power behind the dragon throne. This event marks the end of an era and the beginning of another, though few at the time could foresee its true significance. Puyi is a child, a pawn in a larger game, and his reign is less a period of rule and more a period of isolation, defined by the confines of his golden cage. As we move through his early life, we will explore the world of the Forbidden City through his eyes. We will see the eunuchs who served his every need, the tutors who attempted to fill his mind with the wisdom of the ages, and the concubines and consorts who were part of his extended yet distant family. We will experience the quiet grandeur of his daily life, the rituals that governed his every waking moment, and the growing sense of unease as the world outside those high walls began to change. This is the story of a child who, for all his power, was profoundly alone. His early years are a study in contrasts, the limitless authority of an emperor confined within a limited, sequestered existence. The historical context of this time is crucial. The Qing dynasty, the last imperial dynasty of China, is in a state of terminal decline. For centuries, it had ruled a vast empire, but now it is weakened by internal strife, corruption, and the relentless pressure of foreign powers. The Opium Wars, the Boxer Rebellion, and a series of unequal treaties have left the country humiliated and ripe for revolution. Puyi's reign begins not as a symbol of strength, but as a final, fragile attempt to preserve a system that is already crumbling. The forces of change, republicanism, nationalism, and reform are gathering strength, and they will soon overwhelm the ancient traditions of the Dragon Throne. Our narrative will gently guide you through the pivotal moments of Puyi's life, from his short and symbolic reign as Emperor of China to his forced abdication in 1912. This is not the end of his story, but the beginning of its most complex chapter. He remains within the Forbidden City, an emperor without an empire, for many years, a curious historical anomaly. We will then follow him as he is forced to leave, navigating a tumultuous world where his imperial identity is no longer relevant. His life becomes a series of roles: a former emperor, a puppet ruler of Manchukuo under Japanese control, a prisoner of war, and finally, a simple citizen in a new communist China. Each transition is a step away from his past and a step into an uncertain future. Throughout this long and winding journey, we will maintain a calm and steady pace, allowing the details to emerge like images from a dream. We will focus on the human aspects of his story, his relationships, his struggles with identity, and his quiet search for a place in a world that had forgotten the meaning of the word emperor. This is not a dramatic saga, but a gentle exploration of a remarkable life, a life that spans the final years of an ancient empire and the birth of a modern nation. As we prepare to close our eyes and let this story unfold, we are reminded that history is not just about grand events, but also about the individual lives caught in their currents. Puyi's life is a mirror reflecting the immense changes that transformed China and, in a sense, the world. His story is a poignant one, full of loss and reinvention, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. So let us now begin our peaceful journey into the heart of a dynasty's end, and the quiet life that followed. As the year 1908 draws to a close, we find ourselves in the heart of the Forbidden City, a world of crimson walls and gilded roofs that seems to float above the ordinary city of Beijing. The air is cold, but the atmosphere inside the imperial compound is thick with a sense of quiet dread. The powerful Empress Dowager Cixi, the de facto ruler of China for decades, lies on her deathbed. Just one day before, her nephew, the reigning Emperor Guangxu, had also passed away. Into this void of power, a small, unassuming figure is summoned. A 2-year-old boy named Aisin-Gioro Puyi. He is the son of Prince Chun, Cixi's brother-in-law, and he is about to become the last emperor of China. The boy's arrival is not a joyous procession, but a solemn, almost furtive transfer of a child from his family's palace to the massive labyrinthine compound of the Forbidden City. He is so young he cannot comprehend the immense weight of the moment. He is just a frightened child, taken from his mother and family and thrust into an alien world. The only thing he knows is the comfort of his wet nurse, and in this new, overwhelming environment, she becomes his sole anchor. The ceremony of his enthronement is a mix of ancient tradition and stark reality. He is placed upon the magnificent dragon throne, a seat of unimaginable power, but he is just a child, crying and wailing, wanting to return home. His father, Prince Chun, attempts to quiet him, promising him that it will all be over soon. These words, meant to soothe the toddler, would later be seen by many as a prophetic statement about the end of the Qing dynasty itself. Puyi's reign, therefore, begins not with a show of force, but with a child's tears. His power is entirely nominal. The actual governance of the vast Chinese empire falls to his father, now serving as regent. But even this arrangement is tenuous. The Qing dynasty is like a magnificent ancient tree, its roots rotted by corruption and its branches weakened by a century of internal rebellion and foreign intrusion. The Empress Dowager Cixi, for all her flaws, had been the dynasty's last strong hand. With her gone, the forces of change, which had long been gathering on the periphery, now begin to surge forward. The air outside the Forbidden City walls hums with new ideas: republicanism, democracy, nationalism. These are concepts alien to the world of the Dragon Throne, but they are gaining traction among China's educated elite and its restive populace. Inside his gilded cage, the young emperor is oblivious to this political tempest. His world is one of ritual and seclusion. He is surrounded by an army of eunuchs, a strange, shadow-like population who serve his every whim. They attend to his dressing, his meals, his lessons, and his play. His life is a series of choreographed movements, from his morning rising to his evening rest. His food is tested for poison by a senior eunuch. His clothes are chosen from a vast wardrobe. He learns to write and read from tutors who are themselves products of the old imperial system, steeped in Confucian classics and the history of his ancestors. He is taught that he is the Son of Heaven, a divine ruler responsible for the welfare of all people under heaven. But this grand title, and the immense reverence it commands within the palace, stands in stark contrast to his own reality. He is a child, a prisoner of his own position, living in a world that is already disappearing. The contrast between the rigid, ceremonial life within the Forbidden City and the turbulent, modernizing world outside its walls is a theme that will define his entire existence. As we gently drift through the corridors of the Forbidden City, we can almost hear the quiet, echoing footsteps of the eunuchs and the distant, mournful cries of a young boy who, through no choice of his own, had been made a symbol of a dying empire. His life is less a story of a ruler and more a poignant study of a man trapped between two epochs. The golden roof of the Hall of Supreme Harmony still glimmers, but the power it once represented is fading like the last rays of a setting sun. We now move into a curious and almost surreal phase of Puyi's life, a period that begins after the official end of his reign. It is the winter of 1912, and the magnificent ancient institution of the Chinese monarchy has come to an end. The Xinhai Revolution has swept across the country, and the Qing dynasty is formally abolished. Yet, for the young Puyi, life within the Forbidden City continues with a strange and unsettling semblance of normalcy. At just 6 years old, he signs his name to the Abdication Edict, a document he cannot read or understand. The terms of this edict are extraordinary, a final compromise between the revolutionaries and the old regime. While he is no longer the political ruler of China, he is permitted to retain his imperial title. He and his household can continue to live within a section of the Forbidden City, and the new Republic of China agrees to provide them with a significant annual stipend. For Puyi, the end of the dynasty is not a dramatic event, but a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. He remains an emperor, but now he is an emperor in a cage, a living relic of a bygone era, his world a gilded prison. Within the secluded walls of the Forbidden City, his life unfolds in a bubble of isolation. He is largely cut off from the outside world and remains unaware of the dramatic changes sweeping across the nation he once nominally ruled. His days are still governed by the rigid rituals of the court. He is attended by a large retinue of eunuchs, a constant, silent presence that caters to his every need. His education continues, but it is an education steeped in the classics of a world that is no longer. His tutors, steeped in Confucian philosophy, teach him the virtues of an emperor, while the reality of his situation makes such lessons tragically obsolete. His days are a monotonous cycle of study, play, and solitude. His only real companionship comes from his younger siblings and, most importantly, his kind and devoted wet nurse, who remains a figure of maternal comfort in a world devoid of true family warmth. Puyi's isolation is not just physical, it is emotional. He is a child growing up without parents, his mother and father allowed to visit only on rare, formal occasions. The empresses and consorts who live within the city are distant, ceremonial figures. This lack of genuine connection, of real human touch, creates a profound sense of loneliness that will mark his character for the rest of his life. His power, though stripped of its political function, remains absolute within the walls of his compound. He commands his eunuchs, and they obey without question. He can order punishments, and they are carried out. This unchecked authority over a small, confined world gives him a false sense of grandeur and an inability to understand the true nature of power and responsibility. He is, in essence, a child king playing with a miniature kingdom, completely unaware of the vast, complex, and rapidly changing world just beyond his walls. The physical setting of his confinement is a character in itself. The Forbidden City, a marvel of traditional Chinese architecture, becomes a paradox. It is a symbol of immense beauty and imperial splendor, yet for Puyi, it is a place of profound solitude and stultifying routine. He wanders through the vast, empty courtyards, the halls with their magnificent dragon-carved thrones, and the serene gardens, each step an echo of centuries of history. Yet he is the last echo. The silent corridors and the elaborate halls are no longer filled with the bustling life of an empire, but with the quiet melancholy of an ending. He is a ghost in his own home, the final occupant of a palace that has outlived its purpose. This period of his life is a gentle, sad meditation on the nature of transition, the quiet, almost unnoticed passing of an age. The world outside is roaring into a new century, but for Puyi, time seems to have stopped, preserved in the amber of a dying dynasty. The tranquil illusion of Puyi's gilded cage would not last forever. For over a decade, he and his court in miniature had resided in the inner court of the Forbidden City, a peculiar historical footnote. However, the political climate outside was growing increasingly volatile. The new Republic of China was far from stable, its government a revolving door of warlords and factions. One such warlord, named Feng Yuxiang, a general with strong Republican and anti-monarchist leanings, saw the continued presence of the former imperial court as an anachronism and a threat. He viewed Puyi not as a harmless relic, but as a potential rallying point for monarchist restoration. In November of 1924, this simmering political tension finally broke. General Feng Yuxiang, having seized control of Beijing in a coup, took decisive action. On a cold morning, soldiers surrounded the Forbidden City. Puyi, now a young man of 18, was presented with a new set of demands, an ultimatum that was far more severe than the original abdication agreement. He was given a mere 3 hours to pack his belongings and vacate the palace. The terms of this new edict were stark. His imperial title was officially and completely revoked, and the annual stipend was canceled. The world he had known, the only world he had ever truly inhabited, was about to be snatched away. The forced departure from the Forbidden City was a chaotic and jarring experience. Puyi, who had never ventured beyond the walls of his compound without elaborate ceremony, was now being unceremoniously pushed out. The sense of displacement was profound. He and his household, including his empress and concubines, were now refugees in their own city. He took refuge at first in the home of his father, Prince Chun, a place that must have seemed both familiar and profoundly foreign after so many years of separation. The abruptness of his eviction left him in a state of shock, a lingering sense of unreality. The walls of the Forbidden City, which had been a prison, now felt like a lost sanctuary. The outside world, which he had only glimpsed from a distance, was now his reality, and it was a harsh and unforgiving place. Puyi's life outside the Forbidden City quickly took on a new and dangerous dimension. He was no longer a secluded emperor, but a high-profile figure with immense symbolic value. The Japanese, who had long held imperial ambitions in China, saw an opportunity. They extended an offer of protection and a new home in the Japanese legation quarter of Tianjin, an area controlled by foreign powers. For Puyi, this seemed like a lifeline. He accepted their invitation, moving into a grand villa and embracing a new, modern lifestyle. For the first time, he was free to explore the world, to wear Western suits, to drive cars, and to learn about a world he had been forbidden to know. He played tennis, listened to jazz, and even considered traveling to Europe. He was an emperor in exile, but for a brief moment, he was also a young man discovering a sense of personal freedom he had never experienced. This newfound freedom, however, came at a heavy price. The Japanese were not acting out of benevolence. They saw in Puyi a tool, a potential puppet for their imperialist ambitions. They began to subtly, and then not so subtly, influence his thinking, planting the seeds of a monarchist restoration. They played on his sense of humiliation and his desire to reclaim his lost throne. He started to believe that with Japanese help, he could one day return to power and restore the glory of his ancestors. This period in Tianjin marks a critical turning point. Puyi, vulnerable and naive, began to move from a position of historical irrelevance into a central and tragic role in a far larger geopolitical drama. His quiet story of a gilded cage was now becoming a pawn in the high-stakes game of international power. The end of his imperial life was not the end of his imperial dreams, but the beginning of a dangerous illusion. Our story now takes a turn from the quiet, contemplative life of an exile to the tumultuous, high-stakes world of international politics. Puyi's period of relative freedom in Tianjin comes to a dramatic end in 1931 with the Mukden Incident, a staged event by the Japanese military to justify their invasion of Manchuria, the ancestral homeland of the Qing dynasty. The Japanese, having seized control of this vast resource-rich territory, needed a legitimate-seeming figure to front their new puppet state. Puyi, still nursing his dreams of restoration, was the perfect candidate. He saw this as his opportunity, a chance to reclaim his throne and his dignity with the help of a powerful ally. He was not to be the emperor of China, but the ruler of a new state, Manchukuo. In 1932, Puyi secretly left Tianjin and was installed by the Japanese as the chief executive of Manchukuo. He was later promoted to emperor in 1934. The grand ceremony in the capital, Changchun, which was renamed Shinking, was a moment of immense symbolic weight. For the Japanese, it was a propaganda victory, a way to legitimize their conquest in the eyes of the world. For Puyi, it was a bittersweet moment. He had a throne again, and he once more wore the elaborate robes of an emperor, but his power was entirely illusory. The magnificent palaces he now inhabited were gilded cages, far more restrictive than the Forbidden City had ever been. He was an emperor in name only, a puppet ruler whose every move was dictated by his Japanese handlers. His seal, the ultimate symbol of imperial authority, was controlled by them, and his every decision was subject to their approval. The daily life of the emperor of Manchukuo was a stark contrast to his earlier years. His court was now filled with Japanese advisors and spies who monitored his every conversation and movement. His once extensive personal freedoms were gone. He was not allowed to leave the palace without permission. His mail was intercepted, and his communications were censored. He was a prisoner in his own palace, a grand figurehead with no actual authority. This period of his life is one of profound loneliness and disillusionment. He had traded his personal freedom for the empty title of emperor, only to find himself trapped in a new and more insidious form of captivity. His court, once filled with the remnants of the old Qing dynasty, was now a hollow shell. His empress, Wanrong, a beautiful but deeply unhappy woman, struggled to cope with her confinement and the political intrigue that surrounded them. Her mental and physical health deteriorated, a tragic side story to Puyi's own decline. The Japanese, for their part, continued to exploit Puyi's position, using him to sign treaties and decrees that benefited their imperial war machine. He was forced to witness the suffering of his people under Japanese rule, a suffering he was powerless to alleviate. The great hopes he had held for a glorious restoration had curdled into a bitter reality of powerlessness and humiliation. As we quietly observe this dark chapter, we see a man who is a symbol of a nation's tragedy. Puyi's story is no longer just the tale of a boy emperor, but the painful narrative of a historical figure being used and discarded by forces far greater than himself. He is a man caught in the machinery of history, his personal desires and hopes crushed under the weight of geopolitical ambition. The dream of his return to power has become a nightmare, and the restoration he longed for is nothing more than a cruel parody. He is an emperor without an empire, a ruler without rule, and a prisoner in a costume of his own past. His journey has taken him from a child's tears on a throne to a man's silent despair on another, equally empty one. The end of World War II arrived with a sudden, jarring finality. For Puyi, who had been an emperor in name only within his Manchukuo palace, the world was collapsing again. On August 9, 1945, the Soviet Union, having declared war on Japan, launched a massive and swift invasion of Manchuria. The Japanese forces, weakened and overstretched, crumbled quickly before the might of the Soviet Red Army. In the chaos of the invasion, Puyi and his court attempted a desperate escape. Their goal was to fly to Japan, where they hoped to find refuge and, perhaps, a new kind of freedom. The journey was a frantic rush. The train they took was packed with Japanese officials and civilians, also trying to flee the advancing Soviet forces. It was a chaotic, humiliating experience for a man who had been taught to believe he was a divine ruler. He was no longer the centerpiece of a grand imperial court, but a frightened man among many, all scrambling for survival. Their train was delayed, and they were forced to take a plane. It was during this attempted aerial escape from Mukden that his journey abruptly ended. On August 16, 1945, as he was about to board a second plane bound for Japan, Soviet paratroopers landed on the airfield and captured him. His dream of a new life in Japan and the vestiges of his imperial existence vanished in that single, decisive moment. Puyi's imprisonment by the Soviets was a strange and contradictory experience. He was a prisoner of war, but he was treated not as a common enemy combatant, but as a person of historical significance. He was sent to a detention center in Siberia, but it was not a harsh gulag. Rather, he was housed in a relatively comfortable sanitarium. The Soviets, particularly Joseph Stalin, saw potential political value in Puyi. They kept him alive and in a state of relative comfort, providing him with a private room, a personal kitchen, and even a few servants to attend to his needs. For a man who had never performed basic tasks for himself, these gestures, while still within the bounds of imprisonment, were a continuation of the deference he had always known. During his time in the Soviet Union, Puyi was a man in limbo. The world outside was in turmoil, and his fate was entirely uncertain. He began a period of profound self-reflection, a process of coming to terms with the life he had lived. He was taken to testify at the International Military Tribunal for the Far East in Tokyo in 1946. Here, he stood before the world and presented himself not as a willing collaborator with the Japanese, but as a tragic victim of their manipulation. He claimed he had been a puppet, a helpless figurehead who had been forced to do their bidding. While some of his testimony was self-serving, it was not without a kernel of truth. He was a man without power, and he had been a tool for others. However, the judges at the tribunal were not entirely convinced, with one judge famously stating that any further cross-examination was utterly useless due to his apparent evasiveness. This period in Siberia, which would last nearly 5 years, was a strange and isolated interlude. He was shielded from the immediate chaos of post-war China, where a new and brutal civil war was raging between the nationalists and the communists. He was an emperor without a country, a man without a future, his fate resting in the hands of a new global superpower. He spent his days in a quiet, isolated world, writing letters to Stalin and wondering what would become of him. He requested political asylum in the Soviet Union, a desperate plea to avoid the uncertain future that awaited him back in his homeland. But as the Chinese communists, led by Mao Zedong, solidified their control over the mainland, the Soviets' political calculations changed. They no longer had a use for a potential monarchist puppet. His fate was sealed. The emperor was being returned to his home, not as a ruler or a revered figure, but as a prisoner of a new regime. With the Chinese Communist Party now firmly in control of mainland China, Puyi's fate was sealed. The Soviet Union, having no further use for him as a political tool, handed him over to the new Chinese government in 1950. He was returned to his homeland, not as a respected dignitary or a royal exile, but as a political prisoner. He was to be a subject of the new regime's ambitious re-education program, an effort to transform former enemies of the state into productive citizens of a new socialist China. For Puyi, a man who had lived his entire life in a world of privilege and unquestioned authority, this was the most profound change yet. He was sent to the Fushun War Criminals Management Center in northeastern China. This was a far cry from his life in Siberia or the golden-roofed halls of the Forbidden City. The camp was not a place of torture or cruelty, but a place of deliberate ideological transformation. The goal was to dismantle the old man and build a new one. Puyi's days were now filled with manual labor and intensive political study sessions. He was forced to read Marxist-Leninist texts and Communist Party propaganda. He had to attend group meetings where he and other former officials, Japanese soldiers and warlords, were encouraged to confess their past crimes and denounce the old ways. It was here, in a stark and unadorned environment, that Puyi was truly forced to confront the realities of his past. His re-education was a slow, difficult, and often painful process. He had to learn how to perform the most basic tasks, things he had never done for himself: washing his own clothes, tying his own shoes, and even making his own bed. This simple, mundane labor was as much a part of his re-education as the political lectures. It was a physical and symbolic dismantling of his imperial identity, a stripping away of the layers of privilege that had defined his entire existence. For the first time in his life, he had to interact with people as equals, to learn to cooperate and work alongside men he would have once considered far beneath him. He was no longer the son of heaven, but a war criminal, a term he struggled to comprehend at first. During this period, Puyi was encouraged to write an autobiography, which he titled From Emperor to Citizen. This was not a private reflection, but a public act of confession and repentance, an important part of his re-education. In it, he detailed his life, but from the new perspective of a man who had come to see the errors of his imperial past and the virtues of the new China. The book, heavily guided by the party, was a powerful piece of propaganda, a testament to the success of the re-education program. After nearly 10 years in the camp, a significant change occurred. In 1959, he was pardoned by Chairman Mao Zedong himself. He was now officially a free man, a citizen of the People's Republic of China. The transformation was complete. The emperor who had entered the camp was no more. In his place was a quiet, contemplative man, humbled and changed by his experiences. This chapter of his life is a testament to both the brutal effectiveness of the re-education program and the surprising resilience of the human spirit. Puyi had lost everything: his throne, his power, his old identity, but in the process he had gained something he had never truly had: a sense of himself as a person, a human being, rather than a symbol. Puyi's release from the Fushun War Criminals Management Center in 1959 marked the beginning of the most unusual chapter of his life: his quiet existence as a private citizen of the People's Republic of China. He was no longer the son of heaven, a puppet emperor, or a political prisoner, but simply Aisin-Gioro Puyi, a man with a past that was both extraordinary and entirely irrelevant to the new world he inhabited. The Chinese government, having successfully re-educated him, now sought to showcase him as a powerful symbol of their ability to transform even the most privileged of their former enemies. His first new role was a humble one: a gardener at the Chinese Academy of Sciences Botanical Garden in Beijing. This was an astonishing transition for a man who had never before held a tool or soiled his hands. The work was physically demanding and a world away from his former life, but it was also a form of peaceful therapy. He learned to tend to plants, to understand the rhythms of the seasons, and to find a quiet dignity in honest labor. This job was not just a practical role. It was a final, symbolic severing of his connection to his imperial past. The hands that had once been served by hundreds of eunuchs now worked the soil, a powerful testament to his transformation. The Chinese government continued to carefully manage his public image. He was paraded as a success story of their re-education program, and his experiences became a potent tool for propaganda. He was a living example of how a person, no matter their past, could be reformed and integrated into the new society. However, his life was not without challenges. He still struggled with the basic tasks of daily life. He found simple things, like navigating the bustling streets of Beijing or using public transportation, to be incredibly disorienting. His mind, once trained in the intricate rituals of court life and ancient texts, was now grappling with the mundane realities of a modern, socialist world. Despite these challenges, Puyi began to build a life for himself. The most significant development was his marriage in 1962 to Li Shuxian, a nurse. This was not an arranged political marriage, but a union based on mutual affection, a concept that was entirely foreign to his former life. Li Shuxian was a kind, practical woman who grounded him in the realities of his new existence. Their life together was a simple one, spent in a modest apartment in Beijing. He had a family, a home, and a quiet sense of belonging that had always eluded him within the walls of the Forbidden City. He had moved from a life of immense but empty public grandeur to a life of quiet but meaningful private contentment. Puyi's transformation from emperor to citizen was a profound personal journey. It was a shedding of identity, a letting go of a past that had once defined him, and an embrace of a new, uncertain future. He had lost an empire, but he had found something far more valuable, a sense of self and the simple joys of an ordinary life. His story in this phase is no longer about the rise and fall of a dynasty, but about the resilience of a man who, against all odds, managed to find peace and purpose after a lifetime of tumultuous change. As we move into the final years of Puyi's life, we find a man who had finally achieved a sense of peace and normalcy. The emperor, who had once held absolute, if nominal, power over millions, now lived a quiet, unassuming life in a small apartment in Beijing. His existence was defined not by imperial decrees or political intrigue, but by the simple rhythms of everyday life in communist China. He worked as an editor for a government department, specifically at the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, where his extensive knowledge of Chinese history and literature was put to good use. He was, in a sense, a civil servant, a role unimaginable to his ancestors on the Dragon Throne. His marriage to Li Shuxian was a cornerstone of this new life. She provided him with a stability and a connection to the real world he had never before experienced. She taught him the skills of modern life that he had never learned: how to cook, how to manage household finances, and how to navigate the complex social landscape of a post-imperial society. Their home was a place of quiet domesticity, a stark contrast to the vast, empty halls of the Forbidden City. He was no longer a historical curiosity, but a husband, a neighbor, and a fellow citizen. He even began to take an interest in the everyday world, following the news and engaging in political discussions, something that had been forbidden to him during his time as a puppet ruler. Puyi's later years were also marked by a certain celebrity, though it was a very different kind from the imperial reverence he had known. He was a living piece of history, and people were fascinated by his story. He would occasionally give interviews and make public appearances, always under the careful supervision of the government. His life had become a powerful narrative, a testament to the nation's ability to transform its past and its people. This public role, however, was secondary to his private life. He was a man who had found contentment in the small things: a meal with his wife, a walk in the park, and the simple satisfaction of a day's work. Tragically, this newfound peace was not to last. The tumult of the Cultural Revolution began to sweep across China in the mid-1960s. The new wave of political purges and social upheaval was a terrifying echo of the instability he had known in his youth. While he was largely protected from the worst of the Red Guard's violence due to his symbolic value to the state, the political climate became increasingly tense. The revolution was a direct assault on the past, on tradition, and on people like him who represented the old China. By this time, however, Puyi's health was failing. He was diagnosed with kidney cancer and suffered from heart disease. His life, which had spanned the end of an empire and the birth of a new nation, was drawing to a close. He passed away on October 17, 1967, at the age of 61. His death was a quiet affair, a final contrast to the dramatic public life he had been forced to live. He was initially buried in a simple grave, but was later reburied in the Western Qing tombs, a resting place for his royal ancestors, a final poignant nod to the imperial past he had so painstakingly tried to leave behind. As our gentle journey through the life of Aisin-Gioro Puyi comes to a close, we are left to ponder the profound question of his legacy. What does the life of the last emperor of China truly signify? His story is not that of a triumphant ruler or a tragic hero in the classical sense. Instead, it is a poignant and complex narrative of a man whose life was a mirror reflecting the immense transformations of a nation. Puyi's legacy is not built on great achievements or a lasting dynasty, but on his unique position as a bridge between two vastly different worlds, the ancient imperial past and the modern revolutionary future. His life began with the immense symbolic weight of the Dragon Throne, a throne that represented over 2,000 years of continuous imperial rule. Yet his reign was over before he was old enough to understand it. In this, he becomes a powerful symbol of the end of an era, not because he was a failure, but because the forces of history were simply too great for any individual to contain. His childhood, spent in the gilded cage of the Forbidden City, serves as a final, quiet testament to the rigid, ritualistic world that was being swept away by the winds of change. He was the last person to live in a world where the title Son of Heaven had any tangible meaning, and in that, his life holds a special place in history. Later, as a puppet ruler of Manchukuo, Puyi's story becomes a cautionary tale. He is a vivid example of the dangers of political naivety and the tragedy of a man used as a tool by a foreign power. His desperate hope for a restoration of his empire led him down a path of collaboration, one that ultimately led to his profound humiliation and imprisonment. His time as a prisoner and his subsequent re-education by the communist government complete this arc of transformation. The fact that a man who had been revered as a god could be successfully reformed into a humble citizen was a powerful piece of propaganda for the new China, but it was also a testament to the human capacity for change and adaptation. He had to shed his entire identity to survive, and in doing so, he found a new kind of freedom in anonymity. Puyi's story resonates because it is a deeply human one. It is a story of a boy separated from his family, a young man searching for identity, and an old man finding peace in the simple routines of a quiet life. He lost an empire, but gained a sense of self. He went from being a symbol of a dynasty to a symbol of a nation's ability to reinvent itself. His life, a long, strange odyssey from the heights of a throne to the quiet dignity of a gardener's bench, serves as a final, gentle reminder that the grand sweep of history is often best understood through the experiences of the individuals caught in its current. He was the last emperor, but in his final years, he became something far more enduring, a man who simply lived. Sweet dreams.